What's up, everybody? Peter X Coffer here, and welcome to another episode of Three Things of the Month. Three Things of the Month in Music. So, yeah, we're all the way to episode 17. Doing 2 months again. It's just been busy. So, I'm doing January and February for 2025. And these are a couple of things I've learned, in the last 2 months. So, let's jump right in. So, thing one is I said in one of my episodes I did on the Beatles was probably the branding episode in the Beatles. I've done a couple different episodes in the Beatles, and I made the assertion that the Beatles created the album. Now, if you're coming, and I took this, from, I can't remember but someone did a history of rock, and I'll put him. It's in my Beatles. I can't think of the name, but he did a two-part history on rock and roll, and he said the Beatles created, before the Beatles, albums were a collection of random collection of songs, and there was no cohesive, unifying theme to them. And, when it comes to popular music, when it comes to rock and roll, doo-wop, is probably the case. I don't know how many blues this, here's an intro, I think the blues, uh, prior, to the mid 60s was also a very singles driven market. But I have to revise this because Miles Davis started putting out albums in the late 40s and early 50s, and certainly by the late 50s, Miles was definitely putting out albums with unified themes and everything else. And remember now, I mean, before rock and roll was king, jazz was king. So 1957, you have Walking, Cooking, and Bags Groove. That's 1957. 1958, you have Relaxin'. And then 1959, you had the classic Kind of Blue, which is in the Rolling Stones magazine's top 500 albums of all time. So certainly by 1959, Miles, but I think a lot of people would argue, those three albums from 1957 were there were themes and they were true albums. So revisionist history coming from your guy here, Peter Exodus Okafor, but I think, I try to be accurate and the purpose of, three things is to talk about what I've learned and revise stuff. Thing two, Eddie Van Halen laid the groundwork for the guitar sound of nu metal. And so that the nu metal is the term that is given to what is hard rock, metal now, post grunge. Um, if you ask me, I mean, I've struggled to name it, so I finally gave in, and most people call it nu metal, so I'm just gonna go ahead and call it nu metal. Nu metal, what is the goal here? Louder and faster for the most part. When you talk about the roots of nu metal, to me, I mean, it starts with Metallica. You probably, yeah, I mean, Metallica is very different than, Led Zeppelin, which was, the late Beatles, from, uh, uh, Revolt or no, Rubber Soul On is classic rock, and then before Rubber Soul is kind of the mop top era for the Beatles. But really, I mean, classic rock starts with Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, and Metallica's doing a different thing. I mean, there's not a lot of blues. By the time we get to Metallica, it's definitely more rooted in classical music. Um, And Eddie Van Halen's style is also, I didn't write this in my notes, but it's also rooted in classical music. The tone that he uses is different, and there's a different playing style. It's a very rapid playing style. In comparison to Jimi Hendrix. So, I'm comparing, a couple minutes ago, I was comparing, Metallica, who I think is sort of the first big new metal band, and compared them to Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. Zeppelin and Sabbath are hard, but they're also more rooted in the blues than um, than Metallica. So I mean, but when you're thinking of Eddie Van Halen, and comparing him to Jimi Hendrix, I mean, Eddie Van Halen had a clearer. They both had power sounds, but Eddie had a cleaner sound than Jimmy. And you mean Jimmy had a dirtier blues sound. And they were both power sounds, but just different goals, and they did different things. And then, I mean, Jimi Hendrix, very much influenced all the classic rock guitarists that came after him. Again, Eddie Van Halen in a cleaner tone, but you got to remember, I mean, as a kid, he played piano, classical piano, and Eddie's dad was a classical musician. So, and new metal was more rooted in almost exclusively rooted in classical music in comparison to classic rock that, starts off evenly kind of rooted in classical music and the blues, and it gets more, branches off, but it gets less blues and more pop or more classical as the 70s go on, and you go into the 80s. So, but I mean, by the time you get to Motley Crue, it's punk and classical, so to speak. So that's kind of just struck me, sometime in the last 2 months, that Jimmy, or like Eddie Van Halen, is kind of the godfather for all the guitarists of today. I think Tom Morello, is is an amazing guitarist. Is probably another one who kind of a big innovator. I mean, you have Hendrix, and then you got Eddie, and then maybe Tom Morello. I mean, bringing the scratching and the hip hop aspect to the guitar playing, um, and just the hip hop elements, and marrying that with punk and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's thing two. Finally, Drake drops a new album, some sexy songs for you. This came out on Valentine's Day. So, um, the album did hit number one on the album chart, and actually took Kendrick Lamar off the number one spot. And interestingly enough, every Drake album has hit number one in the U.S. So pretty interesting. No one else can say that. That's a pretty interesting stat. I don't know what it means in this era. I don't know how they tabulate album sales. I mean, platinum, gold, platinum, and diamond, were the big designations back in the album era. But now, in this single era, I mean, the big, I mean, everybody hangs their hat on, having billion stream songs, so songs with a billion streams. And if you use that marker here, I don't think anything on this album is going to get close to a billion streams. So I don't know. I said, I did an episode on Drake and his songwriting prowess, and I, paid him a lot of compliments. I do think he's one of the, all-time great songwriters. And what he does on this album, and he takes one of the unique things I think songwriting style he literally created, and that's mixing R&B ballads with rap. But he does his whole album that way, and it's close to 20 songs, and there's not a lot of variety. It's not different than what a lot of other artists do, and what the labels want. They homogeneity the songs for albums these days. Wish it wasn't the case, but it is. So yeah, I mean, I've made I know some people, certainly Gen X and Boomers criticize, Drake, saying his albums, aren't very good, and I'm not gonna argue with that, but my comeback to that is that this is the singles era. Most artists these days are not album oriented artists. I mean, um, certainly Tyler the Creator and Ye and Kendrick Lamar are. I know some artists try to be, but Drake doesn't try to be. He basically is with today's thing, and trying to churn out as many billion stream single songs as possible and giving the labels what they want. Let me see here. So Give Me a Hug, my favorite of the singles or that charted. So Give Me a Hug came in at 18 in the U.S. It's my favorite of the ones who charted. 38 million streams. So yeah, that's not getting to a billion. Nokia 17 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the U.S. 84 million streams, and Die Trying 32 on the Hot 100 Billboard chart in the U.S. and 60 million streams. Lasers also charted, at least on Spotify in their list. I also like OMW. I suppose that means On My Way, and the last song on the album, Greedy. So, I mean, sort of, I mean, he did, for those keeping track, he did knock off Kendrick Lamar off the number one album. But, I gotta, since we're reassessing the post battle here, I gotta give, and Drake comes in at a deep disadvantage because he's not an album artist, but again, I'm gonna have to give Kendrick Lamar the nod, both when it comes to quality of the album, which Drake was never going to win that because that's not his thing, but quality of songs too. It is what it is. He did on this one, Drake, team up with the Party Next Door, another Toronto musician. The one thing, he doubled down on what he does well, and he did go in a different direction that nobody's done. So I give Drake credit for that. And people say, "Oh, Drake's unoriginal," yada yada yada. Well, no, he's this is a form of songwriting he invented. I think it would have been more effective if he would have gone 10 to 12 songs rather than close to 20, but, he didn't ask me. But it is what it is. I still like some things off this song. I still think Give Me a Hug is a very, is a good sleeper classic that if it came out some other time when, he wasn't, Drake wasn't on outs, it may have done better. So, and keep in mind, I mean, both of these artists now are 37. They both have been in the Drake and Kendrick. They both have been, out there front and center as artists for many, many years. And I did a whole episode on To Take the Throne, and I talked about everybody else who kind of hit a wall at 37. The Rolling Stones being one of them. And I mean, even Prince. So it's a tough age, but I think I followed up with To Take the Throne, Take the Throne, Who's Next, and interestingly enough, there is no king or queen coming to take the throne. Oh, another bad news though for Drake, before his, beef with Kendrick Lamar, he was about 3 or 4 billion streams ahead of other artists when it came to the artist with the most streams in the era. So I mean, hey, that made, say what you want, that made Kendrick, or I mean, that made Drake the king of this era. I mean, the streaming era. Well, the last time I checked was a couple weeks ago, and who's in charge? Who's in the lead now? Well, about half of the folks counting say Drake, the other half say Taylor Swift. Now, if you go back and, follow my trail on the whole Drake Kendrick Lamar beef, I was like, Drake, you need to put this to rest and, start dropping bombs again, because Taylor's coming. Well, looks like Taylor's got here, and Taylor might be passing up Drake as far as the sales leader for this era. So, hey, the data is the data. It doesn't lie. I still like some stuff on this album. I don't think it detracts from, Drake as an artist and his legacy. But it is what it is. So anyway, I think that's it. Thanks for coming through. Let me hit this close. Thanks for coming through. What I got? 6 albums now on all the streaming services. I also have 2 science fiction fantasy novels and a novella on Amazon. I do my music under the name Exodus, Xodus, and I write my fiction on Amazon under the name Peter Exodus Okoffer. So thank you again for coming through, and I will see you next episode.